question this time is Valentine's Day, which is surprisingly one of the busiest days at the place that I work. So I haven't really had a lot of time to write, record, or research the last week or so. Giving you a little peek behind the scenes as to when I'm doing these recordings and such. So instead of putting together a full episode, we'll just talk about some stuff, some personal things, some more personal questions, as it were. And back to your regularly scheduled episodes next week, we hope. I'm gonna do something a little weird with these. I'm actually running low on questions from my friends, from their sort of original curiosities, and I'm gonna pick the ones. There are two here that I think are difficult to answer, and I'm gonna go with those. We'll just sort of talk it out and see if we can figure out what they meant. So we'll start with this question from Zach. What is the most interesting variation of a word you've heard from someone else? And I honestly can't decipher what that question is supposed to mean. We actually ended up talking about this sort of by happenstance. Oh, this would have been a months ago, now at this point. And somebody asked him about this, and I don't remember what he said, which would have been very helpful. But I think if I remember, and I don't, but if I pretend to remember correctly, what he meant by that was, I think, a word that is either pronounced differently than you are used to hearing it, or used differently than you are used to hearing it. As an example, I think, I was listening to my father and my uncle talk when I was younger at my uncle's house. He has a small, well, you'll hear the term in a second, but he has a small stream of running water running through his backyard that like separates his land from the like farmland that's just behind him. And they were discussing what it would be called, like what the terminology for it would be. Probably because my brother and I and my cousins were probably playing in it, or near it, or whatever. So they needed to describe where we were. So I would call it a creek, and my uncle calls it a crick, with an I. And my father, ever the educated man, was actually explaining that crick, C-R-I-K, is, I think, its own word, used to mean like a very small stream of running water, whereas a creek is intended to be a little bit larger, or maybe slower rolling. Maybe it was speed that has something to do with it. I don't know. Anyway, so that would be sort of, I understand that in my explanation there are two different words, but that would be my best guess as to the word, right? That saying creek in that sort of southern accent, the creek, is a variation of a word that you've perhaps never heard before. The trouble is, I'm not sure I've ever heard these, and then also committed it to memory, I guess, right? Like, of course I've heard them. It's possible that I've heard these I've heard words used in strange ways, or ways that I'm not used to them being used, or in accents, or, dialects in which I'm not used to, that makes it sound like a different word. But I honestly can't think of any, which is, a little disappointing, I suppose, if you're the question asker. As I've been sort of setting up and getting ready to record this, I've been racking my brain, thinking of maybe this, maybe that, and the easy, obvious answer is any slang term to have come out in the last 10, well, really ever, I suppose, depending on how old you are, right? Who remembers, ooh, this slaps, to me, a slap is, like an attack, right? It's open palm striking someone, typically in the face or butt, I guess. But if a thing slaps, then it's good. which, whatever, but that's slang, which would be a different question, right? The question would be, what's the most interesting slang term you've ever heard from somebody else? In the same vein that, like, 6'7" is currently a thing, or things were lit for a time, or, I could go on and on about these, slang terms or whatever, but I don't think that's what this question means. I think this means somebody who is, like, legitimately using a term in a way that is unusual to the person that's listening to it. And I just can't, like, don't get me wrong, I use terms in weird ways at work. I think we all do, right? There's a weird example, but there's like an overhead store, well, not overhead, there's a second story storage area at work that we use that we call tower, just because, like, it's in like a tall structure on the roof, it looks like a tower. But, like, that's what a tower is. That, using that term as a location doesn't change its definition. It's just applying strangely because people don't normally have towers on top of their buildings. Yeah, I guess unfortunately that's all I really have for that one. And keeping to our theme for our second question, just as confusing, I'll read it all out here and then we'll break it down, I think, point by point. From Chris, what is a core personality trait of yours that you are both humble and braggy about to yourself, but have never admitted to anyone else? And boy, oh boy, do I hate this question. Humble and braggy are sort of antitheses of one another. If you are humble about a thing, you are then not braggadocious about it, and if you are braggadocious about something, you are then not humble about it. So, maybe this is an example of somebody using a term that I'm unfamiliar with. I imagine that they mean something that you are proud of yourself, but are humble enough about to not tell other people. Is I think the interpretation that I'm going to go with for this question. And I don't know. Different question. We're gonna sidetrack and come back to this. I'll say film and television generally, when they do interviews, they almost always use like the same generic questions. And one of those questions is, it's either for interviews or for like a first, to show a first date or something in a movie or whatever, is tell me a little bit about yourself. And or I'm gonna tweak it a little bit and say, what is your greatest flaw? In both of those circumstances, I will say I hate talking about myself. So this question, the original question, sorry, of my thing, what are you braggy about to yourself but never admitted to anybody else? The whole point, well, not that I knew that, but the whole point of this exercise was to talk about, I guess myself or whatever, which I guess is a flaw of my own self, but to ask me about something I've never told other people, it feels very oxymoronic, right? I guess I've said it before in other videos. I haven't told anybody, at least that I know, that I have a YouTube channel, that I do YouTube. Not that I'm necessarily bragging about that, at its core component, it is very easy to be a YouTuber. All you have to do is record a video and put it on YouTube. That it's so easy that children can and literally do it. Well, I'm sure those kids have help from their parents, obviously, but you know what I mean. It's very simple to become a person on YouTube. And I'm not, big or famous or whatever enough that I would brag about it. In fact, quite the opposite. I'm being quite quiet about it. I don't know why, I guess, but I'm not necessarily humble about it. I'm just sort of stating facts. I don't know. Anyway, gosh, I really don't otherwise know how to answer this question. If you are going to be open and honest with the people around you. You know what I mean? If you're going to enter into like trusting, loving relationships with the people around you, you should be in a safe enough space to admit these kinds of things to the people around you. So I don't know that there is any trait of mine that I am, braggy about myself that I haven't told other people. I mean, okay, one thing did just pop into my head, and it's not, I hate that it popped into, it's the thing, I hate talking about myself, I hate being braggadocious like this, but I will, I'll cross-promote. Sorry, the idea is very funny. There's a website, I feel like I've mentioned it before, but whatever, there's a website called Sporcle, Sporcle. It's a quizzing website, where users can come on and create their own, like little trivia quizzes or whatever. And I make, or did, I haven't made one in years. Boy, I'm behind on updating them, or maintaining them, I should say. Anyway, I am one of the, top Yu-Gi-Oh! Archetype contributors to the website. Not that they're tracking that, or they need that by any means. But as regular viewers of the channel will know, Yu-Gi-Oh! Uses this concept of archetypes, which is to say a naming convention which joins multiple cards together. So, for example, in the, what's a good one? Let's go with the Monarch. In the Monarch archetype, you have cards like Caius, the Shadow Monarch, Mobius, the Frost Monarch, Zaborg, the Thunder Monarch, Kuraz, the Light Monarch. They all have Monarch in their names. So if you later print a card that says, target one Monarch in your graveyard and special summon it, now you can target any one of those cards because they all say Monarch. That's sort of just how archetypes are applied. So when I was on Sporcle as a teenager, college student maybe, probably in my 20s, I found Yu-Gi-Oh! Quizzes, and I realized there was a dearth of archetypal quizzes, like, hey, can you name all the monarchs, for example? And then I realized there was like a big create button right at the top, and I went, oh, I could do this. I have the free time and the know-how and the knowledge or whatever to put these together. So I did, and I started making them, and I made them like straight through for like 2 or 3 or 4 years. Being unemployed straight after college certainly helped with that. I had a lot of free time, and I think I created a whole bunch more during the COVID lockdowns. Again, free time, nothing but free time. But anyway, it got to the point where I had a couple of dedicated fans on the site who would message me occasionally requesting hey, could you make this quiz, or hey, could you make that quiz, or whatever. Basically just asking for the other archetypes I hadn't done yet, which is kind of cool. And I guess that's a story I've never told anybody, so there you go, dear listener. Now you know this. I suppose you could deduce my username on other platforms if you do go there and find these quizzes. Yeah, I guess that's the quality, is that I am good at making Sporcle quizzes, or, that I did make Sporcle. I can't even, that's the thing, right, is I can't even say that I'm necessarily good at it. I just made a lot of them, to the point that I got a little bit famous for it in one very small corner of the internet. Anyway, alright, now that that's done, let's do some questions from me. I want to end on one. I'm going to end on one that I would really, really love your responses to, just because I am actively curious about this, and I don't know of a good way to look it up. I'm pretty good at what we called Google Foo back in my college days. I'm pretty good at manipulating Google searches into finding precisely the information I'm looking for on some website, or searching for the right thing and following the rabbit hole of hyperlinks down Wikipedia to eventually get to the subject I'm looking for. Anyway, so the last thing is gonna be that, but before that, it's a question that comes up in a slightly different sense somewhat regularly. My family gets together once a month for like a little family dinner thing. You know, there's only like 4 of us, so we live not so far apart that it's unreasonable that we do it, but just far enough apart that like once a month is about as commonly as we can afford to, you know what I mean? And because there are, you know, a multiple of 4's worth of months in the year, each of us gets to pick a restaurant basically once a month, 3 times a year, basically once a quarter-ish, you know. We get to pick a restaurant. So the question I am asked by my family somewhat regularly is, hey, when it is your turn, what restaurant do you want to go to? And I absolutely hate this question, mostly because I'm not very good at forward planning for like food. I don't know what it is, but about it, but I'm almost always just like a figure it out when I'm hungry kind of a person. I don't really pre-buy foods to like have at home for later. You know, it's just sort of, oh, what's available. So, you know, whenever they ask me, it's always like a month in advance, and I'm just like, gosh, I don't know. I don't know what I'm gonna want a week from now, a month from now, excuse me. So, instead of, for you, dear listener, instead of saying what I want to go eat, I figured I would just list a few of my favorite restaurants or chains or whatever. You know, just for funsies, I guess. I don't know. Places that I think about going to every time we have to make these plans. Places that I think about every time we have to make these plans, but, you know, don't necessarily always pick. We'll start simple, we'll start easy. Places you've maybe heard of before. We'll just go with favorite fast food restaurants for whatever thing. I'm a big fan of Panda Express, if only because it is cheap and extremely quick. And don't get me wrong, it tastes good too, but, you know, in my list of fast food restaurants I would go to, Panda's usually up there at the top because of its price and speed. I'm a proponent of Burger King. I'm a fan of the Whopper. They have a good, geez, here I'm just advertising for fast food now. They have their wraps. They're relatively new. It's basically just like a chicken strip in a tortilla with some sauce and lettuce and tomato, but they're really good. I don't know what they're doing, how they're cooking it different or whatever, but they taste really nice. So, fan of Burger King, would pick Burger King. If I'm going to get a fast food burger, a Burger King Whopper specifically is the thing that I am going to get, or that I would choose to get. Chicken nuggets wise, I think I'm still choosing McDonald's over anything else. You know, not that other places have bad nuggets per se, but there is something so specific about the taste, the flavor profile of a McNugget that it's hard to compare to. I don't know. Other than that, though, there's not a lot of reason to go to McDonald's. It's pretty low on my list. Sandwich chains. I think Potbelly is my number one. I tend not to go there of my own volition, as they tend to be a little bit more on the expensive side. Though maybe that's the choices I'm making while I'm there. I don't know. Potbelly. I always put Quiznos I used to when I was a kid. I put Quiznos pretty high up there. I like Quiznos sandwiches. I like their foods, but kind of like Arby's, which sadly is also one of my more favorite places. Quiznos and Arby's, I guess together, are both very hard to find nowadays. At least in my neck of the woods, there are few and far between. I do not like Jimmy John's. I also do not like Subway. I'll eat them, it's not like I will avoid them actively, but I choose not to eat those places. Panera, kind of similar. Oh, I love Jersey Mike's. It's Potbelly or it's Jersey Mike's. Those are like my top 2 sandwich places. At least that I can actively get to. Quiznos being like a ghost third, I guess, because they don't really exist. I'm a fan of Noodles and Company, of pasta generally. Not as local anymore, but there's a place that's local to like the Chicagoland area where I'm from, called Portillo's, which I'm fond of. Again, it's like, burger grill type food. I don't go there as often as maybe I could be, but it's pretty good. Okay. I'm also a fan of, well, we call it Cane's. I think technically it's called Raisin Cane's, but Cane's chicken strips or whatever, chicken fingers. Pretty good. And I guess now we get to like actual restaurants. There is, it's a weird story. There's a suburb of Chicago, and there are other places in the U.S. that have them, but in Chicago specifically, there's a suburb that has a little place called Mitsuwa Market. It's like a little Asian market. It's like a, boy, I don't even know how you would describe it simply. It's got a grocery store and a bakery and a food court. That's where we're going. And a bunch of other stuff, but it's like a little just like Asian. It's an Asian restaurant with a lot of like Japanese and Korean and Chinese foods and stuff, and a Japanese bakery and all that stuff. Anyway, they have an excellent ramen shop there too. Not that their other foods aren't delicious, but one of my favorite all-time restaurants is this little ramen shop in the Mitsuwa. Alright, moving on. My favorite pizza place, which I think sadly is closed. I haven't been back into Chicago to look for it in a while. It was a place called Pompeii. It was a small little like local family-owned chain pizza restaurant, and I think last I drove by there, it was closed. It was my favorite, I guess, when I was living in Chicago and wanted pizza. That was the place I would go. If I'm in the mood for like fish, like, a cooked like fillet, something or other. Bob Chin's Crab Shack has maybe the best seafood I've ever had. At least in terms of like, prepared restaurants. As you might be able to tell, I don't go to a lot of fancy restaurants. So, boy, is that it. Gosh, is my list that short? There was one dish at TGI Fridays that I really liked, but again, I think Fridays have otherwise gone out of business. Yeah, I guess I have a relatively short list, and you can now see why I hate picking restaurants to eat at. Either I don't like a lot of things, or I haven't been around much. Either way, I guess that's that for that question. And now, the final question, the one that I am most curious about. Especially, I would like to know your answers, so after you listen to the question, maybe hear my explanation of it, leave your answer down in the comments below, please. I do want to know if there are other examples of this. Okay, here's the question. From me to you, but then answered by me. What is your favorite example of a television show that is otherwise fully grounded in reality, introducing a single episode wherein something completely unexplainable, purely fictional, is real? So what I mean by this is a show like, Law and Order or Friends or, whatever. The shows where the characters are not themselves superhuman or supernatural, and, maybe extraordinary things happen to them because that's television, but they're not magic, they're not aliens, they're not superheroes, they're just regular people living their regular lives in the regular United States of America, or, London, or wherever the hell, right? Wherever you happen to be, wherever the television show happens to be set, wherever, that has a singular episode wherein something literally impossible, that is something literally magic or alien, happens, or is visible, or whatever, and the show, whether it's the writers or the characters themselves, can't go out of their way to disprove that it is magic. So, I'm fairly certain this happens regularly, and I'm guessing it happens in, like, procedural shows the most. Things like cop shows, lawyer shows, where, like, the overall plot of the show is episode to episode, unlike a show like, Game of Thrones or Breaking Bad or whatever, that's like telling a story across 20 episodes or whatever per season. It's a show that like does just like The Simpsons or whatever, that does like a different thing every episode. Though I would exclude, I guess, The Simpsons and other animated shows, as the nature of animation is typically to do things that are not normally doable by humans, choke your son such that his tongue sticks all the way out of his mouth, or any other manner of thing done by animated character that you and I both know is physically impossible for a real human to do. Dangling in the air before falling down due to gravity, or, spinning, winding up your fist before punching, that kind of stuff, right? Anyway, so the thing that keyed me into this principle, and that I think I can only provide a single example of, but there has to be more than one, I am certain of it, is from Season 3, Episode 2 of the ABC cop drama/comedy Castle. The episode is, He's Dead, She's Dead, and it centers around the murder of a sort of famous psychic, or like a famous, I want to say TV psychic, but maybe not TV. Anyway, about, I guess it's right before like the second commercial break, so about 10 to 15 minutes into the show, the detectives, sorry, I should explain if you've never seen Castle. It was a show about Detective Kate Beckett and her partner, who ultimately is a paperback murder mystery writer, Richard Castle, solving crimes. He blah blah blah, inciting incident. He needs a muse, finds her, convinces everybody around her / her to let him work with her, and then they solve crimes together. Whatever. It's a cop show. He tends to be the believer of what, it doesn't matter what the crazy conspiracy theory is, he's on board with it until the truth of the matter is revealed, right? Oh wow, did the squirrel kill him? No, obviously, but he's gonna pretend because that's comedy. Anyway, in this episode, he's very on the side of, oh my god, a psychic is real and solved all these crimes, even though every time they come up against a case she did or had anything to do with, she just did basic, investigative work to solve it or whatever. But he still wants to believe. I think the best line he has in the show, at least about his sort of idea for this kind of thing, is, I just rewatched it so I would have notes for this thing. Anyway, I'm trying to remember the quote, which I am angry I didn't write down. If you don't believe in even the possibility of magic, how will you ever see it around you? Or something like that, which I think is very nice, right? Keeping your heart open to the idea that something cool or interesting or magical could happen to you is the only way you're going to notice it. If you close your heart off to that kind of thing, you're never going to see it. Anyway, so about 10 or 15 minutes into the episode, the police are, I guess, our main characters, Castle and Beckett, arrive back at the precinct, and the two partner detectives that they have are putting together some evidence and stuff, and they have in their possession a letter that arrived that day from the victim, or I guess from the victim's letterhead, written in the first person as a description of her imminent death, which Castle is like, oh my god, she predicted her own death, and all the detectives are just like, no she didn't. So, in this letter, she mentions 4 big things, big clues, I guess, that she can't breathe, that there is a man in black, the number 7518, and a furious pounding that she hears from far away. And then over the course of the investigation, we, the audience, and, our characters interact with some or all of these clues, which leads our believer character to be like, oh, she predicted the future, she predicted her death. And then our non-believer character has to come in and explain to them, well, actually, it could have been this, or could have been that, whatever. And all of these things sort of ultimately get explained in the episode. Apologize, this is about to get mildly graphic for those of you who don't like murder. The woman dies by being stabbed in the back of the neck with an ice pick and then stuffed inside of a fold-out couch. And she goes in still alive. So she has, she dies of asphyxiation. I don't know know if she drowns her own blood or if she just is suffocated by the, like, being folded inside of a couch thing. But in either event, she does die by asphyxiation, which is the sort of can't breathe thing. There are, in fact, two men in black introduced into the plot of the episode. There's a man dressed in all black that is seen leaving the victim's office out the back door, like, hours before her death, so hey, whatever. And then the, like, classic cop show first suspect, which tends to be the innocent character, screenwriting, etc., etc. Anyway, is also brought in protesting that he had anything to do with it, and he's wearing all black as well. So, you know, two men in black in the whatever. There is a furious pounding. There is a guy from a different case the girl worked on. The victim, worked on. Who she goes and meets with and says, hey, I have this urgent information I need to tell you. He arrives back in her office and is, like, pounding on the door, you know, because the door is locked, pounds on the door for a little while, and then leaves. And then the number is, that one's the most waved away. The phone is in the middle of dialing her daughter's number. The victim has her cell phone in her hand in the couch and is in the process of dialing a number, and that number, rearranged a little bit, is this number. So, like, you know, dumb psychic BS. That's the one I care about the least. But at the end of the episode, as with most / all cop dramas / cop shows, they sort of wrap everything up into one tight little bundle, one neat, easy to follow timeline, which they very nicely draw on a whiteboard throughout the show, so you can kind of see the progression of where all the information goes and where the timeline it fits. You can sort of put it together in your head. It's very nice. It's very good visual storytelling. Trouble is that when they finally align all of these things, the detective character, the non-believer character, is like, see, everything was explained. Not the believer character says, well, actually, according to the timeline, which means that according to the screenwriters of the show, the way the events progressed were the man in black leaves, and we learn later that she's actually also confronted by that man in black, like, shortly after that also, so two men in black, back to back. She then goes to talk to this guy at his job, comes back to the office, writes this letter about potentially dying, drops it in the mailbox, we assume, back into her office, I guess. Sorry, that part's that's an aside, a whole other thought I have. Anyway, so the timeline of events is the guy in black leaves, the actual murderer shows up, kills her, stuffs her in the couch, then leaves and returns to their fake alibi thing. You know, they step out of, like, a dinner party or something for like 20 minutes, run over, kill the person, then run back and pretend like they, you know, hey, I got the whatever. Then the guy she talked to shows up at her locked office door and is pounding on the door before leaving, putting the theory that the cops were giving that the murderer wrote the letter and then sent it to the police to, like, dissuade them from leading them into following the, like, fake psychic clues rather than following the actual clues. It makes that false. It means that this woman, assuming she's the one who wrote it, the only person who could have known about the pounding on the door is the dead woman. Nobody else knew that the guy was going to show up and pound on the door. The murderer went in, killed her, got out fairly quickly. The guy who did the pounding never got in, couldn't have gotten in, couldn't have written it. Also, why would they? Nobody else had any reason to write the letter, except for maybe the daughter. The victim had a daughter. She's also introduced in the show as having some of her mother's gift. She drops a couple of little hints, both of which end up being true, but given how the episode progresses, you know, the cops believe that psychics are charlatans, which in most cop dramas they end up being. You know, the information that she dreams about and then gives the cops ultimately is very simple information. She knows the, like, real birth name of our main character, Castle. When he becomes a famous writer, he changes his name, so, like, that's information that's easy to look up. And she also mentions like, Mason's later in the episode, which turns out to be the restaurant where the killer was at, establishing an alibi before slipping out and doing the murdering. So, you know, those are, I guess, both things that she, like her mother, could have looked up and found, but they're, like, presented as being proof that she's psychic. Anyway, the way the show tells the story, ultimately, long story long, the way the show tells the story about this woman being psychic, it is establishing that it is physically impossible for anybody to have written the details of this letter except for the woman who is claiming to be psychic. No one, only two people on the planet could have known about the guy pounding on the door, and it was the guy pounding on the door who had no reason to write the letter and any of the other information that would have been on it, and the girl who is dead who is claiming to have written the letter, which would mean that a show that is well and truly based in fact and fiction and making some comedy out of those points is saying that this woman was actually psychic. It's about the only episode in the show that does this. It never comes up again, but technically speaking, in the world of Castle, in the 6 or 7 seasons they have or whatever, they did technically establish that psychics are real. So, I'd like to know your thoughts on the matter. What are some television shows like this, real world, real episodes of things that deal with magic or psychics or ghosts or whatever and don't do a good enough job at explaining where those things come from to the point where it makes it feel like or read like or look like the supernatural is real? Go ahead and leave your answers in the comments down below, or any other questions you would like